Welcome back to Behind the Screams. I am horror author Jared Hill, formerly known as Ezekiel Kincaid. And tonight we are doing a movie which I have seen 5 times. 5 times I have watched this film, and 5 times I am still not a fan. With that being said, I know Robert Eggers is kind of polarizing, and people either love his stuff or they hate it. Now, The Witch was one for me. I saw it when it first came out and thought it was boring. And then I was like, well, maybe it's just me. So I watched it with my daughter, then I watched it with a friend. That's 3 times. Still didn't like it. Then I watched it again by myself, and after 4 times, I was like, "Okay, I don't think I'm going to like this film." And then, of course, I watched it a 5th time to get ready for this show, and my 5th viewing, I have to say that I actually did like it more. I don't know if that's because I knew everything was what that was going to happen, and I could quote a lot of the stuff and, really was able to focus more on the dialogue. I don't know, but I will say the Robert Eggers film that I really did like out of all the stuff that he did was the new Nosferatu film. I am a big fan of that one. With all that said, I know that there are a lot of you out there who absolutely love this movie, The Witch, and I can understand why. And it's not like I don't appreciate this movie, because I do. I think the atmosphere that Eggers creates is very dread filled. The cinematography is excellent, and his historical accuracy, which is some of what we're going to talk about tonight, is just spot on. And he makes you feel like you're actually there in the time period watching events unfold. So the movie has a lot to its credit. It just wasn't my cup of tea. However, what I want to do is dive deep into this film. I want to break down the plot a little bit, and then I want to talk about some of the themes that come up in this movie and the history around this time period, especially the Puritan culture of the early settlers in the early colony. It's going to help bring a lot of things to light and might even make it a little more dreadful for you the next time you go back and watch this film. Now, if you haven't seen it, it is still one, even though I don't care for it, it is still one that I would recommend because of how well it's done, because of the impact that it has made in horror itself. So definitely, if you haven't watched The Witch, go see it. It's streaming right now on several streaming services. I know it's on HBO Max. If you have Max, go ahead and check it out. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and break down the plot for you. Now, there are spoilers in this. However, if you're kind of, for me, when I was watching the film, there weren't really any surprises. It kind of went along as I expected and thought things would go. This is not like an M. Night Shyamalan film where there's going to be some twist that you're not going to see coming and it's going to shock you. It's nothing like that. This film is just pure dread from start to finish, and you watch this family collapse from the moment that they get exiled from their community till up until the end. You're watching the slow demise of this family. So the exile, that's how this movie actually starts off. The father, William, who is a deeply devout Puritan father, he is banished from his New England plantation for his pride and his disagreements with the colony's local religious authorities there. and he gets exiled, and he takes his wife Kathleen, his daughter, his teenage daughter Thomason, their son Caleb, and then the twins Mercy and Jonas. So he's got his family, and they go out into the wilderness to start a new life. So they get out there and they build this homestead in the woods. They start making this small little farm, and the edge, like, you can, the way that it's done, like the edge of the woods, like, it creates this dread. Something is out there that is not good. It's ominous, and it's also nearby, and so there's kind of this symbolism of physical and spiritual danger of the woods that is surrounding this family. And then after they get the homestead built, the infant, they have a baby, also it disappears. So one day, the teenage daughter Thomason, she's playing peekaboo with the baby. The baby's name is Samuel, and when she uncovers her eyelid, the baby is poof, it's gone. And then the movie takes this cut, and it goes out into the woods, and we see into the forest that there is this witch there, and there's this slaughtering and grinding of a infant's body into saliva, and it's meant to grant this witch the ability to fly. And so as things progress in this film, like I mentioned before, there's just this growing dread that does not stop, and the crops end up failing. The family's corn withers, the food grows scarce, and Catherine, the mom, she sinks into this despair, and she starts to blame herself and think it's her sin for the loss of Samuel. And William is over here, like, torn apart inside, secretly confessing that he traded his wife's prize silver cup for hunting supplies. But he ends up letting Thomason take the blame. So you can see the family dynamics out here is in the isolation is already starting to take its toll on them. And you have what enters now one of my favorite characters in the movie, and it's not a human. It is the goat, Black Phillip. Black Phillip, to me, is what I like best in this film. He is this huge black goat with these long horns, and just every time he's on screen, you're waiting for something ominous to happen. You know that this thing is not right, and there is just this air of darkness around Black Phillip. There's this supernatural unease, and there's a scene where the twins are singing these really weird songs about their goat, Black Phillip, and they claim that Black Phillip speaks to them. And Thomason gets onto them, but the goat, the more they show it, you can tell its presence is just becoming more and more sinister. Then, as the film goes on, Caleb kind of has this innocent childhood thing, attraction to his sister, and follows her out in the woods. He gets abducted by the witch because they get separated, and when he comes back, he is naked, feverish, delirious, and he kind of goes into this weird state where he's like convulsing and confessing his love for Christ, and then he dies. And this is where things really start to shift in the movie. The twins start accusing Thomason of witchcraft, and she accuses them back. And up to this point, after this, I'm not really going to give you much detail. But as you can imagine, with these accusations going back and forth, with the presence of Black Phillip, with Caleb being dead, with the crops failing, they start to interpret all of these as bad omens, as things from Satan, and the paranoia and the dread just get worse and worse and worse until the end. The evil finally takes over. Stuff happens with Black Phillip, and the dad, and then at the end we have Thomason and something really supernatural and I guess depending on your viewpoint, horrible happens to her where she gets consumed at the end. And there's a couple of scenes in there. The mom has some visions and some nightmares about things, and then towards the end there's this big conflict between Thomason, Catherine, and William that escalates into to violence. So that's all I'm going to give you in case you have not seen this movie. I don't really want to spoil much more, especially that latter half where things start to really kind of ramp up in the dread. Um, it's nothing really you won't see coming, but I still want you to experience that without any spoilers. What I wanted to do is just kind of lay the groundwork for you to prepare you in going into this film. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and all of you who has watched Robert Eggers, you know the historical accuracy that he likes to do when he presents his movies. Now, that's what I want to jump in here and talk about for the next few minutes for the remainder of the show. So, The Witch takes place in the 1630s in New England, a few decades before the Salem witch trials, and um, which took place in the 1690s. Now, the family here in the early colonies, it places them right into this Puritan, well established after about 10 years New England colony. And though they're starting to get well established, they're still really small. And Eggers picks this time period very deliberately in some of the stuff that I've read, because this is where religion and fear and isolation create the the perfect setting, the perfect soil, if you will, for a story about witchcraft. And there's several reasons why this works so well. The first has to do with the early Puritan struggles that they had. The family in The Witch is only about 10 years removed from the founding of the Plymouth colony, like I had mentioned. The colonists were still, establishing themselves, getting established, carving out survival out of the wilderness. They had harsh winters, scarce food, and strained relationships. They had indigenous people, and this isolation led to paranoia, and the wilderness itself becomes symbolic for chaos, danger, and kind of the devil's domain. We'll see that when we look at some of the Puritan writings, which brings me to my next point: is the Puritan theology and fear. You see, in the Puritan mindset, the world was full of visible and invisible dangers. And these dangers came from supernatural forces where Satan was around every corner, and he was always looking to get you, and he was actively going to tempt you, deceive you, and attack you. And so for them, a lot of times, witchcraft was this very real thing in the present for them that they had to be aware of. It wasn't just a spiritual threat, but it was a real physical threat in their mindset. So by setting this film in the 1630s, Eggers could explore the mindset of where the supernatural was accepted as part of the daily life. It wasn't, considered something superstitious or something in the margins. Like, this was culture for them. And he's also exploring the atmosphere of the settlers before the Salem witch trials. And you can see some of this paranoia about witchcraft that bleeds into the movie. In the 1630s, when New England was still forming, um, really working on its religious and cultural identity. The strictness of the Puritan way of life was very, very strong, and there was not tolerance for dissent or difference. And Eggers does a great job of showing this with a family who is strict in their faith, but they are also exiled from the community because the dad refuses to conform to the colony's wishes. And by casting them out and isolating them, it really heightens this family's vulnerability to Satan and to evil forces. And that's one of the big things that we need to remember with this film. That's what Eggers is playing off of. Isolation from the community opens one's family up to the dangers of Satan that lurk outside of the community and in the wilderness itself. And so Eggers gives this great historical authenticity to the film, because if you watch all of this stuff, it is all like that, and he does a fantastic job. And the dialogue in the film, he actually drew it from 17th century diaries, court records, and Puritan sermons. Even the farmhouse, the clothing, were all recreated using early 1600 building techniques and materials. Like, this dude went down to a T, every detail, to set this atmosphere up for the viewer, and to make it become historically alive for us. And he taps into this raw frontier era Puritan experience before the Salem witch trials, and this witch panic was mainstream. We can see it starting to bubble up here and starting to take its early forms, especially once the family is banished and put out into the wilderness. So the other thing we need to look at is, we've talked about the witch trials and we've talked about the historical accuracy, but there's also historical basis for what he did based on Puritan theology. And that's what I want to hit at here in the end and wrap up with this. So when you look at this idea of isolation and the family being cast out, and them having this breakdown, there's historical basis in this. For Puritan communities would often banish members that they perceived as being in dissent, and the exile was quite literally a death sentence. And that's what the movie brings forth, is that this isolation, you knew it wasn't going to end well for this family. We see this in Puritan texts. If you look in, there's some texts that Eggers drew from in the Massachusetts Bay Colony that described families or individuals that were forced out of their settlements due to disagreement or over their moral behavior. So just think about that, like getting kicked out of your community because of a moral behavior that they disagreed with you about. Like, think of that, getting kicked out of your neighborhood, kicked out of your city, banned from your city because someone did not agree with your moral choices. That's basically what it was like for these people. And so the family's exile, it mirrors this type of punishment that took place during those days. And you see, when they're isolated, it begins to magnify their fear and their paranoia about the evils that are lurking there. But for them in this setting, and that's what I like about Eggers, like, he there's no questioning, well, is the supernatural real? Is, this thing in witches, is it real or not? That's not left up for debate. He takes us into their mindset and makes us feel it, that this was real to these people. And he brings us there and shows us that dread. The Puritans also had a obsession of and a fear, almost an unhealthy fear of sin. Um, the sermons constantly warned of God's wrath, of original sin, Satan's activity, and strict obedience. And a lot of times, in some of these Puritan sermons, the idea of grace gets overshadowed. Now I will say, because I have read a lot of Puritan works, especially some of the later Puritans. All of their stuff is not like that. You can find things. Even I know Jonathan Edwards gets a bad rap because of some of his stuff, but if you read other things by him, you see a different side of him that emphasizes grace and love and mercy, and compassion and forgiveness towards Christ. But that still doesn't change the fact that there were definitely some things that the Puritans seemed to go overboard, and would be considered, or would be considered, quite fanatical. And this fanaticism is what led to the Salem witch trials. Now, other Puritans would come out later, looking back, and pronounce judgment on what was done in the witch trials, and see the error of what happened. But you really can see that sometimes this overemphasis of Satan being around every corner and temptation lurking everywhere, instead of making people alert, it made them paranoid. And that is the danger whenever we overemphasize anything. Is it loses its importance, and it stops people from being truly vigilant in a good way, and it starts to feed into paranoia. And that's what happens here, and that's what Eggers brings out. Another theme in the Puritans, and they draw this straight from Scripture. The wilderness is satanic. Now, if you go back to the ancient Near East and you look in the Old Testament, and then even the New Testament draws on some of this imagery, the wilderness and the wild beast, right? The place where, on the Day of Atonement, the hands were laid on the scapegoat and it was sent out into the wilderness, the Azazel. The wilderness was seen as a chaotic wasteland full of demons and creatures, and basically just a not a good place to be. It was a place of testing and trial as well. So the Puritans kind of adapted this, and the early colonists often described the New England wilderness in the same way. They described it as devilish and full of spirits and temptation. So they took this quite literally, and took that kind of when I say mythological concept, I'm not referring to something that does not have any historical basis, because a lot of what we see in the Old Testament, it's just it's not, there's not quite a genre like it in today's mindset. It's this mix of poetry, myth, and history, all tied up into one. So they take this idea of the wilderness, and they make it a strict historical thing, that out there in that wilderness, in that New England wilderness, there are devils and there are spirits, and it is full of temptation, and you are not safe if you are exiled or banned from your colonies. John Winthrop, you see this in some of his writings, and I believe Eggers probably drew upon that. He talks about the wilds and the wilderness as a place where Satan can ensnare souls, and you see that happen. That's what Eggers does. He makes it true in this movie. This family exiled, they go out into the satanic wilderness, and they are corrupted and captured by the darkness. The fourth thing with the Puritan culture in the early 1600s is witchcraft was a real daily fear. They believed in real witches that would corrupt and influence and try to hurt and destroy, and that they were directly influenced by Satan. This was mainstream before the witch trials hit, and we're starting to see that in the 1630s. There are actually records, and this is before the witch trials. There are actually records from the 1630s that describe arrest and confession of witches within these small colonies. So this was already starting before the Salem witch trials. You've got court records and you've got pamphlets that show Puritans attributing any type of misfortune, whether it's sickness or crop failure, sudden death, to witchcraft and demonic interference. There was almost this over unhealthy obsession at times with Satan being around every corner and causing all of the bad things that would happen in their life, and that spills over and that plays big into this movie. um, Another theme found in the Puritans that Eggers plays off of is this idea of gender and temptation. Puritan theology often emphasized women's vulnerability to sin and temptation, especially around sexuality. They unfortunately did not have a high regard for women, and so they viewed them as more culpable and more easily led astray, and that's why they targeted women in the Salem witch trials and even before this. And their sermons and their manuals during this time period that stressed that women needed more moral guidance, warning of how their failure could lead to spiritual corruption. So they kind of very patriarchal society, and they kind of saw women down here, especially when it came to spiritual things, that they were just more naive and susceptible. And that's why you see definitely Thomason being the first one blamed for all of this. So um, that idea of gender and why they were blaming the women, like that is because of their low view of women at this time period as being more susceptible to any type of negative spiritual influence. So Eggers takes all of these themes, and he takes all of this history, and he plays well off of it, and he does such a fantastic job of bringing all of this onto the screen and taking you into this mindset and taking you into this world to see it through their eyes. So if that is your type of film, you are going to love this. It is very slow, so don't go into this film expecting fast pacing. It is an extremely slow burn. But hopefully, if you watch this before, you can take all of this into consideration, and maybe it will help it be more interesting and come and become more alive for you. So that is Robert Eggers The Witch from 2015. Takes us back to the 1630s in the Plymouth, the early colonies, with this dread of witchcraft. Streaming on Max right now. If you have that, definitely go check it out this spooky season if you haven't seen it. So thank you for tuning in, and I will be back next week with more Behind the Screams.